Well, hello there, students. Good afternoon. This is Mrs. Gordon-Coy, and I am talking to you today as a review of forces in motion. This broadcast is going to be broken up into two segments. Today, the first segment is going to be dealing with the three main types of field forces. So we're going to be looking at magnetism and gravity and electrical forces. All right. So today in class, we actually went through, you received this PowerPoint. I will try to link that also to the website. It just go to sandyvalleylocal.org, go to teacher pages, middle school, and our class is right at the very top. So you should be able to find what you need there. So we're going to go ahead and start with the notes. So just bear with me for a moment as I go to a screen share. There we go. All right. So, oops, I started at the wrong place, but that's okay. We'll get to those common misconceptions. But let's look at force and motion standards. So these are the things that the state of Ohio says that you must know, and I happen to think they're pretty important too. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so the overview. So we're looking at the fact that a force is a push or a pull. Now that can be something that, well, I'll wait and get to that third point here in a second. Force is measured in newtons. And then this is the point I was getting into. Force between objects act when the objects are either touching, so in direct contact, or when they're not touching. Now, it is presumed by the state of Ohio that you received all of your touching information, your touching forces, your contact forces in your elementary years, although we have touched on them. But we're just focusing on magnetism, electrical, and gravitational forces, because those can all act at a distance. Now, before we do that, just general stuff that can go with any particular force. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this real quick. Is this idea of a force diagram. So no matter if it's something like force due to gravity, which is definitely a no contact and no touch force, or force applied, which could be either a contact force or a no contact force, it's best to draw a simple diagram and label all of the forces that are acting on the object. So in this case, we have our normal force, which is opposite to the y direction of gravity. We have our force of friction, which is opposite of the applied force. And in this case, just judging by the general size of these arrows, I would say that the net force in this particular example is going to be 0. But we'll get into that more in a little bit. Fields. Fields, we're not just talking about green grass. Boy, I wish we had some more green grass right now. But a field model is something that we use to explain how two objects can exert a force on each other without touching. So let me give you an example. Here's a picture of a magnet, and here are the field lines. Notice that the field lines are moving from north to the south pole, but it's not like when you look at a magnet that you're actually going to see that. You know, you've played with magnets the last month. You don't see the field lines unless we do something else special with it, which we'll talk about, like with the iron filings. So if you're not seeing the field lines, you need to model them. We model in science lots of things. I have cell models in my classroom, and they help me explain cells because it's not like you can see my cells very closely. So a field model is just a way to explain it. Now, an object is thought to have a region of influence called a field surrounding it. Now, I talked about, and I'm going to come back over here real quick, and we're going to stop the screen share for a minute. And I talked about a magnet, and I said, let's pretend like this magnet is Johnny. I don't even have a student named Johnny right now, so that works out well. Okay, and this particular Johnny, this version of Johnny, he's a good guy. He's got straight A's. He helps out the elderly. He reads to kindergartners. He adopts homeless puppies, and he rakes people's leaves. He's just a great, great guy. Well, if I have another magnet and it's over here and it's far away, sorry, Zuma just jumped onto my screen there. Sorry, Zuma. Anyways, so if I have this magnet over here, it doesn't really have, my good guy here doesn't really get to have much influence on this particular student. But as this student gets closer and gets to know this other student, Johnny, a little better, he can actually start to feel his field of influence. He's going to start rubbing off on John, or not on Johnny, but we'll call this guy Joe. He's going to start rubbing off on him, and they're going to click and they're going to interact. Okay, now if I had a very unnice Johnny, this Johnny didn't go and visit old people, and when he read to people, he read them the wrong words on purpose just to mess with them. And instead of raking other people's leaves, he would rake up his leaves and then dump them into other people's yards. So just a mean and nasty guy. Okay. Same kind of thing though. If Joe's over here keeping his distance, this Johnny isn't going to have a lot of influence on him. But as he gets closer and closer, he starts to feel that field of influence. Okay, so that's what we're talking about with fields. And it's also a good lesson on, choosing your friends wisely. But I mean, I am pushing these magnets together, and they're not really going together because they're two like poles here. And then when I put my opposite poles together, they attract. Well, they attract because they're within that field of influence. But if I have them right out here and I let it go, gravity takes over, and the magnetic field of influence is no longer really, it's kind of a moot point. So there is a limit to these fields, I guess is where we're going with that. Okay, we're going to go back to the screen share. I'm working on how to do this a little better so that it's a little more seamless, but I do working on this. Okay, so when we're talking about fields of influence, we're also looking at the second object having an appropriate property. Now, what's great about this is you guys are really good with your properties. So if I have a piece of paper, that's not magnetic. So I can have a magnet really close to a piece of paper, but it's not going to be influenced by the magnet at all because it doesn't have the appropriate property. All right, so here we again have that picture that we just had. So now we're going to look at electrical fields. Electrical fields, probably one of the areas we've spent the least amount of time with, but very important. Please do not confuse magnetic poles with electrical charge. That's a sticking point for a lot of people. Magnetic poles, the fields move from north to south. Electrical fields move from positive to negative. So we're going to bring up this game here. This is electron field hockey. All right, now I'm not a big hockey player, but I get the gist. All right, so if I am moving from a positive to a negative, then I should be able to get a goal by doing this. Let's see what happens. All right, it's working. It's just a little slow. Woohoo! I got a goal. All right, now I'm going to reset that. Reset. And I'm going to go ahead and put a positive charge here. This should make it go a little faster. Now, look at this. You see how that arrow, look how long it gets as my positive charge gets closer and closer and closer. And as I move it further and further away, that arrow gets smaller. Remember, we talked in class that the length of the arrow is directly related to how great of a magnitude that force has. The number gets bigger. It gets stronger. So I'm going to put it right here, and we'll hit start. Ooh, it did go faster. Woohoo! Okay, now I'm going to move it even closer. I would think that it should go a lot faster. Let's see. Yeah, that didn't go as fast as I was thinking it would, but you kind of get the gist. Now, if I reset it, and I'm going to put, I want to see my field lines. look what happens as I move this around. Isn't that neat? Okay, but notice that the positive charge, let's clear this real quick, add the negative. All of a sudden you can see that there is this tendency to go to the negative. If I bring this guy over here, then that's going to add a lot of strength to these arrows. We still have this area here where it's not really strong. I don't know if I can't really move that guy. What happens if I put another one? What do you think's going to happen? Let's see. Okay, let's keep an eye on these middle arrows. Do they get a little darker? Put a lot of the negative over here. I think they're getting a little bit darker, which means to me, I think they're getting a little bit stronger. Let's hit start. Woo! Boy, I got pretty good. All right, so there you have that. Let's go back now. We're talking about electric fields. Electric force weakens rapidly with increasing the distance. We saw that. Let's reset and clear. We'll put our negative back over here. We'll get in our positive. Now remember, we're looking at the strength. Look how rapidly, look how rapidly that decreases as I decrease my distance, or I increase my distance. So as I increase the distance, look how rapidly I decrease the force. Pretty slick. And off it goes. I just like that. It makes me feel like I am some sort of a athlete. All right, here we go. Moving on. So this is a nice way to sum it up. It says that the electric field direction is always directed away from the positive charge and towards the negative. And we played electric field hockey. Now, notice we didn't play that one. Yeah, that one would take me probably all day. I can go straight towards the goal. All right, magnetic field lines. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on magnetic field lines. We spent a lot of time in class on them. We were able to play with the magnets a lot, and you sprinkled iron filings on top of the paper, and that had the magnet underneath of it. And when you did that, you were able to see the field lines. Then, if you remember, and maybe we'll get some video of this, we used the spectrum tubes. And when we used nitrogen and hydrogen, well, we were really able to see those field lines. But I want you to think about something here. I want you to look at this picture. The picture correctly, not Southern Lights. Okay, what's going on? What do we see? Well, take my little arrow here. Do you notice these lines here? What do you think that those might be? Well, from the best that I can tell, with everything that we've learned, I truly believe we're seeing basically the field lines, the magnetic field lines of the Earth. So it's sort of indicating to us where those magnetic field lines are. It looks just like the spectrum tubes did for us, so that's pretty cool. Okay, gravity, next one. So we talked about electricity, we talked about magnetism, now we're going to talk about gravity. Gravitational fields exist around objects with mass. Guess what? You have mass. I have mass. Everything that is something has mass. If a second object with mass is placed in the field, the two objects are going to experience mass. So we're going to come over here. We're going to look at two objects that we're pretty familiar with. Whoa. We're going to reset. Reset all. Because usually when I do this, it's like my perspective is way off. Let's make this a little bigger. I'm not sure what happened. Cartoon. Oh, I'm on the 2 scale. That's why. Reset all. That's much better. Okay, so I was going to say, wait a minute, this is not what we did. But now, this is the cartoon, not the 2 scale. But what we're going to see, our gravity is on. We're going to show the gravitational force, and we're going to show the path, and go ahead and hit play. And so as the Earth is traveling around the sun has gravity on the Earth, and the Earth has gravity on the sun. They are having a force on each other. Well, let's go back to what this said. It said, if a second object with a mass is placed in the field, the two objects experience attractive gravitational forces toward each other. It also says gravitational forces weaken rapidly with increasing distance. Hey, that's just like we saw with the electrical particles, and we're looking at the positive and the negative. Now, I like this one. This is the sun, the moon, and the earth. And check out that. I never really gave that much thought. But what happens is the moon, because it's orbiting around the earth, and the earth is orbiting around the sun, it has kind of like a flower shape. One of my kids thought it looked like scrambled eggs, or not scrambled eggs, but a donkey egg over medium. But pretty neat. Now, we also looked at velocity. I'm going to go back to a little more of a simplistic view then, just the sun and the moon, and look at velocity. One of the things that's neat about this is if the force of gravity, for whatever reason, we're going to pause it, if the force of gravity, for whatever reason, would just stop being there, which would be highly unlikely, but let's just say that that happened, what would happen to the object that was circling? Well, an object is in motion. It's going to stay in motion unless acted on by another object. So if that other object is no longer acting on it, it's going to stay in motion. And I'm going to click gravity off. And when I hit play, you're going to see that the Earth would just continue to move in a line that's tangent to its path. And there it goes. Now, for all of you like freaking out now, thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to spin away from the sun. That's not going to happen. Okay, the sun isn't just going to magically disappear. But it is kind of neat. All right, so hit play. Oh, I've totally changed our orbit now. Oh, this is bad. And we reset. Very nice. All right, so now for time, we have to keep moving on. I can play with these simulations, trust me. You have gravity too. So this is another point from the state of Ohio. This is actually word for word out of their standards. Every object exerts a gravitational force on every other object with mass. The gravitational forces increase with mass of the objects, decreases rapidly with increasing distance. So it's kind of repetitive. We've already said these things. And then it goes into weight is proportional to mass, but depends upon the gravitational field on a particular location. An object will have the same mass when it's on the moon as it does the Earth. So when we did the triple beam balance experiment, and you guys were taking the mass of the different objects, then we calculated the force due to gravity on the Earth. And then you calculated the force due to gravity on the moon. Okay, so the mass stayed the same. Mass never changed. I have something else I want to show you here with gravity. I think it's this one. Nope. It's this one. There we go. All right, so I have another gravity experiment here. Here we have Galileo Galilei. He's hanging out on the famed Leaning Tower of Pisa. And we're in normal mode, but we are going to be able to go in vacuum mode. So let's go in normal mode, and we're going to drop a couple items. Possibly going to drop a couple items. Oh, well, maybe we're not going to drop a couple of items. Looks like it's having some technical difficulties. We'll try it again. There we go. There's Galileo grabbing that sphere. And here we're going to have him grab another smaller sphere. And we're going to allow him to drop these things. Now, what do you think might happen? And I apologize if the window's so small. I couldn't figure out how to do that differently. Well, when we drop it, and we're in... Oh, clunk. Okay. Well, maybe we should try that again. Reset. Oh, man. All right, let's do something that I have time to get down to. We'll drop a feather, and we'll drop the big sphere. Okay, are they going to hit at the same time? Well, when we're not in a vacuum, I think you guys probably know, the answer is pretty obvious. But just so you can see, right? But what happens, sorry, I have to wait for the whole thing to happen. What happens when we put them in a vacuum? So a vacuum is just, there's no air in it. So notice Galileo has his nice little air suit on there. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take that same experiment. Take this sphere, and we're going to take this feather, and we're going to drop it. Now I better hurry up and scroll down because they're going to drop at the same time. they're going to experience that same acceleration due to gravity. Pretty cool. All right, so we did both of those things. Electromagnetism, electricity is related to magnetism. This is a question on your test tomorrow. It talks about how does electricity create magnetism, and how can magnetism create electricity? It's really crucial that you understand this. This is in your everyday life. This isn't just, hey, I think I maybe learned something about that year that we had Mrs. Gordon-Coy. This is something that's going to be in your everyday life. So electricity is related to magnetism, and in some circumstances, magnetic fields can produce electrical currents in conductors. So we talked about conductors. Metals are great conductors. Copper works very well for any of these things. And we said that electric currents produce magnetic fields. So when we looked at building the electromagnet, we are going through and taking the electric current, and we're passing that, it's wrapped around the iron, and that's producing the magnet. And that's going to be like the big magnetic fields that you see, or the big electromagnets at the scrapyard. So when you see those big scrapyard ones, that's what's happening. But then how can we actually harness the energy and the relationship between magnetism and electricity? And to do that, we can take either the solenoid, the coil that we talked about, or the magnet itself. Got to move one or the other. You're either going to move the magnet really, really fast, and that's what we talked about in class, moving that magnet really, really fast, or moving the solenoid around it. But either way, moving that magnet fast, here you're going to get a view of that, we can create an electric current. So if I come over here, this one. All right, so I've got my magnet, and I'm going to pass it through. Now, this solenoid has 4 coils, and this one has 2. And what's very interesting, I'm not going to show the field lines just yet because it can get a little confusing. But as I pass this magnet through here, hang on, there we go. Hey, as I pass the magnet through, I create a voltage, and it's pretty significant. You know, when you look at where that voltmeter is going, it's dipping all the way down. Now, if I come up to this just 2-coil one, the voltage is not even half. It's more like a quarter. So really quite a bit less voltage is created, less electrical current is created when you don't have as many coils. So those coils are super important. Now we can show the field lines, but you see what I'm saying? It kind of becomes a mess a little bit. All right, back to this. Generators do convert mechanical energy. Did I cover every? I want to make sure I didn't skip something there. So we talked about that's how magnets can create electricity, and we did talk about electricity creating magnets. Okay, just double checking. Motors and generators. Generators convert mechanical energy into electrical energy and are used to produce electrical energy in power plants. Motors are in your blenders, your washing machines, and generators. If you've got a backup generator for when the power goes out, you are utilizing this relationship. So I'm going to end today with some misconceptions. Some common misconceptions that kids have, and adults, is that only animate objects can exert a force. That is not true. Not true at all. If I got hit on the head with a rock, it would be hitting me with a force. Force is a property of an object. It's not a property of an object. Inertia is a property of an object. Force is something that is being done to something. It's either being applied or it's based off of the relationship of the molecules that's around it, but it is not a property of the object. I love this one. An object has force, and when it runs out of force, it stops moving. Force is not like gas in your gas tank. You can't just run out of force. It's not like I'm walking down the road and then I just run out of force. Okay, if it's something that's being done to me, then all of a sudden that force is maybe not being applied, but it's not like I actually run out of force. Another misconception, large objects exert a greater force than small objects. No, it's all based off of mass. So a large object could be very light and a small object could be very heavy. So size, in this case, does not affect that. The only thing I could say to that is if it had anything to do with the distance between the two, but let's just leave it at it does not matter on the size. And then finally, there is no gravity in space. Well, I think we realize that if there was no gravity in space, we would be spinning out into the planets, and that would be, that would be no bueno. So anyways, those are some common misconceptions. And let's go ahead and come back into the Hangout. Stop sharing. All right, very good. So what I hope that you understand from all of these things is that there are three forces that are actually quite a bit of fun to learn about and quite a bit of fun to play with. Maybe not quite as fun as Zuma, but I don't know, some people might think more fun. So we're looking at gravitation, we're looking at magnetism, and we are looking at electrical forces. So my question for you is, when we're talking about electrical forces and electrical charges, what direction will the force fields, if you will, travel? Will they travel from the positive charge to the negative charge, or the negative charge to the positive charge? Anybody know? Oh, come on. Of course you know. It's going to go from the positive to the negative. Think about that hockey game that we played. Okay, another question. All right, so if I was looking at properties of magnets, this is not so much from the presentation just now, but just think back to questions that I might ask you on the test tomorrow. What are some properties of magnets? That's my little timer. Supposed to be my drum roll. There we go. All right, so properties of magnets. Okay, magnets are either going to be made up of iron, cobalt, or nickel. And magnets have poles, and magnets exert some sort of a field. So very good. All right. Well, you have done a great job, and kudos to you. If you listened to this lecture today, come in to the classroom tomorrow and say to me, or write it down, don't tell anybody, the word applesauce. And I'll give you a little extra credit for doing a little extra work tonight. So remember, applesauce. All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.